Alrighty, today we're going to take a look at TODD HUTCHINGS versus IRAKLI ZIRAKASHVILI, a more in-depth analysis. It's been over a month now since these videos have been posted, so we're able to do this kind of more in-depth analysis on one of the rounds. And the round I want to look at because I think it's the most interesting and it kind of shows the entirety of the flow of this match is round 2. So TODD HUTCHINGS is up right now, 1-0, and I believe that was on fouls. And what we're going to see is IRAKLI's super strong elbow flexors, his super strong biceps versus TODD's side pressure. TODD obviously has talked quite a bit about how he doesn't think biceps matter all that much in arm wrestling. And IRAKLI, of course, is very much so opposed to this idea. He has probably the strongest biceps in this weight class. I think he's strict curled 242 pounds or 110 kilos, if I remember correctly, perhaps even more at this point. So this is a really interesting style match. Now, right off the go, we're going to see IRAKLI's biceps in a very impressive lane. He has this really high, very steep forearm angle, and notice how that doesn't really get lost at all. He pretty much goes all the way to the back of his pad, maintaining that forearm angle, and that's because of how strong his elbow flexors are. He's able to take high grounds. With the hand, he cracks TODD's wrist back, and he maintains a pretty good degree of wrist flexion up until this kind of last moment right here. Now, traditionally, this would be a terrible position for TODD. Great position for IRAKLI. What makes TODD so special is, of course, his side pressure and his lat drag, his short forearm, but also his ability to pull without his wrist. If TODD does not have the ability to pull without his wrist, this match is probably over from right here. And that is where people who have extremely strong elbow flexors really shine. When they pull someone who doesn't do as well without their wrist, you're just going to destroy them. And bicep and elbow flexion is super, super important in arm wrestling whenever we're talking about taking hand control. But if hand control doesn't matter, then your bicep power becomes significantly less valuable. Because as we're going to see, TODD doesn't really lose any power once his wrist gets cracked back. And if anything, TODD's wrist getting cracked back maybe makes it even more difficult for IRAKLI to maintain his own wrist flexion because of the angles now. He's beginning to get a little bit overpronated. And you can see his wrist lose a little bit of cup right as he kind of bounces off TODD right there. His wrist maybe looks a little bit worse for a second, and he comes back up to the top. And what's going to happen is TODD is going to drag out to the very back of the pad. Something that happens, and you can see right there now, the battle is a little bit different. TODD is at the very back of the pad, and he has locked in his lat drag. Now it's a little different because it is TODD's lat drag versus IRAKLI's bicep. The worst thing in arm wrestling about lat drag is that you're destroying your own wrist. If you simply lat row directly back, you're almost guaranteed to lose your wrist flexion because your lat is almost always going to be stronger than your wrist flexion. The beauty in TODD's style is that he doesn't care about his wrist flexion, which gives him access to so much more power. So one of the things about TODD, one of the reasons he doesn't care about his bicep strength that much is because he just uses lat drag. If he needed his wrist flexion, he couldn't do this because you can actually kind of protect your wrist flexion with your elbow flexor, and that's what IRAKLI was doing by posting up high. You can protect your wrist flexor. But of course, the lat is going to be way stronger than the bicep, pretty much always, unless there's just a huge strength imbalance, which there's not here. And because of that, TODD now is fighting IRAKLI's bicep with his lat drag, even though IRAKLI has the strongest biceps in the world. And I would say TODD does not have the strongest lat in the world. Watch what happens now as IRAKLI drags back. He tries to drag back, and notice how his elbow flexor angle opens now. He tries to go back, and that hand height drops. You see it right there. Boom, he starts to lose his pronation. He starts to lose his elbow flexor angle. And this is only going to continue as the match goes on. He can kind of hold this off a little bit by going to TODD's winning side of the table and kind of gaining his bicep angle back. The problem is every time, and you'll see it right there, look at that. Every time he's going to try to drag back, his arm angle is going to be closer to TODD's. Look at how low TODD's arm angle is right here. well below 45 degrees, whereas Irakli's forearm angle is maybe right around 45 degrees. So what that means is that as both opponents drag, Irakli has a really high disadvantage in terms of that bicep angle. It's just way easier to maintain a lower angle here because of the leverage you have. You have more lat access, whereas Irakli, trying to use that strong bicep to protect his cupping, has to keep that forearm angle steeper. Todd's fine with a really shallow forearm angle. Irakli is not, because he's going to lose his wrist. And you see as he drags back, of course, Todd's lat drag and his side pressure beats Irakli's bicep because he's willing to let that wrist flexion go. And as soon as Irakli's bicep starts to open, he's not going to have anywhere near the amount of side pressure, anywhere near the amount of control that he needs in order to defeat Todd, because he's not going to outside pressure him. But what's interesting here is that Irakli manages to unlock a new lane here. And we go from this state of Todd is isolating Irakli's bicep by letting his wrist go. He isolates that bicep with his lat drag and side pressure, and all of a sudden it switches. Irakli dumps underneath, and you can see that transition right there. Todd's side pressure and lat versus Irakli's bicep. All of a sudden, it's Irakli's press versus Todd's bicep. And Todd, of course, is known for having weaker biceps. So his game plan is designed around never needing to rely on his bicep. If he can let that wrist go and simply use his lat drag and his side pressure, incredibly difficult to defeat. But if you get in a position like here, where this is a really good position for most arm wrestlers, but Todd's biceps are significantly weaker than the average person in this class. And as soon as Irakli, even with his wrist broke back, he has access to Todd's bicep. He's able to press him really easily down to the pin pad, opens him right up there. So this is where, you watch the John Brzenk versus Irakli match. John has much stronger elbow flexors than Todd. It was really difficult for Irakli to press through John. But against Todd, it's not so difficult. So this is one of the things that happens with Todd when you're in this overpronated, kind of ugly position right here. If your opponent keeps trying to top roll you, you're in a really great position, but you're potentially vulnerable to this transitional flop press. And this is pretty much the way that the flow of the match goes. From this moment on, and we'll get a cool little replay here, and you'll be able to see that drag. You can see how that doesn't work. Great position for Irakli in terms of hand control, but because, and look at that lower angle from Todd, as soon as he tries to drag out, he loses that elbow flexor angle. But flops that meaty part of his palm underneath, and now he has access to Todd's elbow flexor. You would think this is a good position for Todd, but as we see, easy flop press down to the pin pad. So this match goes from kind of what we saw the last time, where it's just Todd's side pressure and lat drag with his wrist broke back versus Irakli's bicep. And excuse me, in that position, when it's bicep versus lat, the bicep is always going to lose. But then Irakli figures out this whole new lane where he realizes, hey, I can flop press TODD HUTCHINGS. That's kind of his weakness. That's one of the weaknesses he's known for. And this is a complete game changer. So we see these little two adjustments in round one. And from this moment on, the match is basically, there's a whole other category to this match, a whole other piece of the puzzle where now Todd can't just drag and do side pressure, but he has to be really intentional about not allowing Irakli into this flop press. And he does so by bumping him off of his shoulder, by really trying to use a lot of side pressure in the moments that matter to keep him from getting here. Because if he gets here, it's over. Irakli's going to be able to flop press through that bicep. So Todd, after that, he does have to worry about that one other thing of preventing him from getting there. But as we saw in that match, he does end up preventing Irakli from ever getting to the flop press. Except on one, at the very end, he tries to flop press off the go, but that wasn't as effective because Todd's hitting sideways super hard. So let me know what you guys think about this match. At this point, I actually would be interested in seeing this one more time, not right away, but at some point in the future, because of this new piece of the puzzle that I talked about, and that's the flop press. If IRAKLI now can figure out how to get to the flop press more effectively, this match could potentially totally change, because now IRAKLI is going around Todd's power and isolating that weakness. So I'd be really interested to see this just because of that at one point in the future. I don't think that IRAKLI is ever just going to beat Todd in this kind of dragging top row lane that he does against other people so effectively. But if he combines that with that flop press, and especially if he gets a lot better at the flop press, I think there could be something potentially in the future. But for now, super great win by Uncle Todd. And I think IRAKLI shows a lot of promise, but he's going to need a little bit more work on that flop. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'll talk to you later.